And joining us now to discuss the effects of the coronavirus outbreak on labour, we are joined by Tebogo Moalusi, who is the Managing Director of Moalusi Corporate Consulting. Tebogo, a very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you.
Well, as the world is still coming to terms with the effects of coronavirus on various sectors of the economy, including the labour market, including business, how do employers at this difficult time make sure that contractual obligations are waived so that employees, income is protected?
All right. So when it comes to contractual obligations, it also depends on the type of business that you have. Obviously the business is going to be exposed to many challenges because we're dealing with something new that nobody is accustomed to. Even our legislation doesn't even provision these kinds of situations. So what's important, for example, I'll give you an example, breathalyzer tests. That's going to be a challenge because these days you just do a breathalyzer test easily. Mm-hmm. But however, now with the coronavirus, you have to ask yourself as a business, how can I get 1,000 people doing this breathalyzer test without ensuring that there's no infections? So what's important is that one can still change your policies and procedures in order to adjust to de-risking yourself from the virus.
And what's even more difficult is the fact that there are no certainties. I mean, there's massive uncertainty as to the length at which this virus will continue ravaging the world, and how long should we wait?
And let me tell you something. The coronavirus has the ability to break down your business. Mm-hmm. Now, as companies, we need to make efforts to ensure that we protect our employees who are ultimately going to protect our business. So companies need to invest, sanitizers, anything. You just need to think outside the box. One of our clients actually decided to say, listen, due to this, instead of my employees actually taking public transport, I'll transport them myself, just to ensure that I protect them from exposure.
One of the measures that have been, communicated by the president yesterday in his efforts to deal with the coronavirus outbreak was the fact that, public gatherings of more than 100 people are now prohibited. Then it makes me wonder then, what about, the manufacturing sector, for instance? What about the factories, which we see more than 100 people working under the same roof? Obviously, that will lead to a sort of a partial shutdown of the economy, and in the long term, it will affect the workers, like the daily pays, like the hourly pays, for instance. How are they protected?
Listen, I think it would be a drastic decision to go as far as saying, listen, we're shutting down business. Obviously, we're moving in stages. We're not there yet. But however, at this point, what's important is that the employers need to make an effort. Yes, obviously, there's going to be large levels of exposure in those kinds of premises. Obviously, if you can just imagine, if one employee is affected out of that large manufacturing business, it's going to have a serious dent. And there's also other things that I want to test the different businesses in terms of when an employee gets infected. How does business deal with such an employee, considering that you only have 30 days sick leave? Yes. However, the business needs to kind of come to the party. And however, the best way in dealing with this, and the quicker we're going to go through it, is by ensuring that we, by all means, try to minimize
and I guess that is the issue. What if business are not coming to the party with regards to employees' rights?
You see, when you're an employee and you see that your company is not coming to the party, go forward and voice out to say, listen, let's do something. And let me tell you, the relationship between the business as well as trade unions is going to be critical. How we engage, how we plan, how we set up our policies is going to make a massive difference in terms of how we handle this issue.
And the dismissals at this point in time will be quite rife. And the issue of employee rights will come to the fore. And then how then do we deal with the antagonisms between worker and employer in these trying times?
All right. Obviously, we're going to go through this period, all right? Then thereafter, there's going to be issues such as layoffs, possibly retrenchments. Possibly companies are already looking at this who are relying heavily on international trade. So when these things come up, the business needs to think outside the box. You can't just say, listen, I'm just going to retrench just to recover from what I've been through. However, you just need to think outside the box. Think about your layoffs. Think about switching things instead of just diving into removing employees.
Well, in as much as drastic measures are very important, are very critical at this time, but we have to make sure that all the labour laws are abided to, and we have to make sure that everything doesn't grind to a halt. Just in terms of readiness of the country to deal with the COVID-19, what does the country's measures, what sort of picture does it paint on the international market in terms of our own readiness?
All right. I think what the president did yesterday, it was a good indication of us taking issues seriously. However, at this point, it's tough to determine how ready we are, due to the fact that it's still early days. But however, as time goes on, and at the rate in which we'll see the infections perhaps come into fruition, that will give us answers to some of these questions.
So what are some of the ways that employers can manage, the effect of this outbreak without actually infringing on workers' rights?
All right. So there's a couple of things. I spoke about the breathalyzer test.
Yes.
Now, another thing that the company can do, if you can have the employees work from home, that's another solution that one can bring to the fore. All right. Then sanitizers. Make sure that sanitizers are available for your workers. Make sure that basic soap is available for your workers. And something that we in business perhaps take for perhaps lightly. Train your workers, advise them, remind them that we're dealing with this epidemic and that they need to ensure that they maximize hygiene.
And then short-term working arrangements, would that work?
Perhaps it can. It depends on the type of business that you are in and how much your business is willing to sway to perhaps move to that particular angle.
Okay, so those companies who are, there's those employees who may not necessarily be privy of some of the precautions that have been, communicated and shared by the government, and they are actually going to work. They're actually oblivious of some of their rights. What should happen to those?
All right. Remember, I did say, listen, business needs to kind of educate. All right. Sadly, you're right, and some employees don't even. There's a language barrier. So business needs to come to the fore because they have perhaps the financial muscle, which is the norm. So they need to communicate to their workers to say, here's the situation. Be mindful of these issues and ensure that you protect yourself and you protect the business for us to move forward.
Are you at all impressed with the, with the government's position in terms of communicating these messages? Because the key government departments which have been, vocal in containing the spread of coronavirus are the Department of Health and we've seen yesterday the Department of Education as well. So in terms of labour or the portfolios responsible for labour, are you at all with the kind of communication that has been disseminated to the public?
Listen, I think from a government perspective, efforts have been made. We can't criticize the government too much. I think they have made efforts. Communication has come through. Even ads have come through to say, listen, this is what we're dealing with. Here are ways in which you can protect yourself. And perhaps for now, from my perspective, I think efforts have been made.
What then do you make of the criticism on the government that they've spent so much in containing the COVID-19 effects and as well as evacuating some South Africans from China? I guess the big question is the bigger cost is not taking drastic action.
All right. So this one, perhaps we have to look at two things. It's loss of life versus perhaps money. In my perspective, the costs are justified. We're talking about if one single person is important. So from my perspective, I believe that those costs are due, and if there is further costs, then let it be so.
Okay. And then the government has come out strongly and warning people against this panic buying. Some sectors will be affected adversely as a result of this. So what's your advice for South Africans who are, making frantic efforts to buy goods?
All right. So I think the first thing is that we don't have to panic. We have to take this one step at a time, and we have to educate each other in terms of dealing with this. So for people to jump into a panic, for business to make drastic decisions, it's not the right way. But however, if we work together as a team, calmly, we can win this. And for us to avoid things such as shutdowns, it's by reducing the cases. And I strongly believe that should we work as a team, we can do it and we can achieve it. In order to evade the shutdown.
Right. Tebogo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Super.
Well, that was Tebogo Moalusi, Managing Director of Moalusi Corporate Consulting, just sharing his views on the effects of coronavirus on labour in South Africa.